Councilmember Carling,
Here.
Councilmember Branning,
Here.
Councilmember Barrientos, Vice Mayor Kick,
Here.
Mayor Marchand.
Is there anybody who would wish to speak to the special item, which is the rules of procedure and norms and values? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, the comment period, and move on to the staff report.
Honorable Mayor Marchand and members of the City Council, this is your City Manager, Mariana Marasheva. The purpose of today's workshop is to review two critical guiding documents for the City Council that set a foundation for how you work with staff as well as amongst yourselves, and also establish City Council meeting rules. Those documents are City Council norms, values, and principles of governance, and City Council meeting rules of procedure. The City Council generally reviews these documents every 2 years. The city has engaged an organizational consultant, Sean Spano, to facilitate today's workshop. Mr. Spano has reached out to you individually before the meeting, and he will discuss feedback that he received from you today. Any changes to the norms, values, and principles, and any changes to the rules that you direct staff to make today will come back to you at a regular council meeting as a consent item. After Mr. Spano facilitates the workshop, our City Attorney, Jason Alcala, is going to walk you through some of the key changes to the rules. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Spano. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, with the pleasure of being here. Advance the slides here. Picking up on your city manager's opening comments here, we have two big segments for our workshop today. The first is, as mentioned, is to review and discuss council's input on the norms, values, and principles of governance. And that was the primary focus in our one-on-one conversations that we had earlier this month, or I guess it was the beginning of January. And then after we work through those items, I'll turn it over to the City Attorney, Jason Alcala, and he'll walk you through the City Council meeting rules and procedures. So let's start with council norms. And in the document, there are council norms, values, and principles of government. You have the description of each of these, excuse me, the 5 norms as well as the 5 values. So just as a quick reminder for everyone, demonstrate respect, take responsibility, encourage civic engagement, show appreciation, and maintain transparent communication. If you'd like, I have the norms and values document that I can call up with the descriptions of these, if this would be helpful for council to see the text that describes each of these norms. Is there
It's a pleasure of the council.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
If we want to make some minor edits, do we want to talk about that now or later?
We can talk about that now. I'll walk you through just a little bit on the input that you provided, and there were some suggestions that I'll open it up for council, and then that would be a perfect time, Councilmember Carling, to bring up any other edits or changes that you want to.
Wait till we get to that.
Yeah, just wait. If you could just wait just a couple minutes. Great. Not seeing the need at this point to have the full descriptions of these, I'll just move forward if that's okay.
Certainly.
And then you have 5 council values: trust, honest and effective communication, data-driven decision-making, teamwork, and enthusiasm and effort. We can talk right now, City Manager, if you wanted to, we might want to make a small change to the data-driven decision-making and just clarify that that includes both quantitative and qualitative data.
You just said it, Mr. Spano. That's it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Very good. Is that okay with council? In terms of what we mean by data-driven decision-making, it covers the full range of data that is usually used in reports and analysis, et cetera.
That was going to be my suggestion. You stole
very
it from
good.
me.
We will attribute that to Council Vice Mayor Kick's suggestion was to add quantitative and qualitative just to clarify what is meant by data.
So you're going to put those in as adjectives in front of data? Okay.
Now let's move on to the input. So as you recall in our one-on-one conversations, I asked you, what are your thoughts about those norms and values? Do they still resonate with you? Are they helpful for this particular council? Any changes that you would suggest? And it was clear from all 5 of you, overall, the agreement that these norms and values are helpful and useful for council. They're still relevant. They still speak to what your norms and values are, recognizing that there was a fairly major edit to the norms and values last October, if I'm not mistaken. It was last October. And the changes, for those of you who are returning council members, the changes that were made last October were also seen as very helpful and useful. One of the suggestions that was offered from one of you was consider adding professionalism to the list. It could go as a norm, it could go as a value, it could be integrated into one of the existing norms and values, or perhaps as a standalone item. So let me turn it over to you all and your thoughts about that, of adding professionalism into your norms and values.
Councilmember Carling?
Thank you. I think that, yeah, one of the suggestion I was going to make, and I think it sort of speaks to the addition of the professionalism, was that under the demonstrate respect, the words that follow are mostly things that come out of our mouth, words, and it doesn't say anything about actions. And I was thinking about the city council shows respect through our actions and words, and then the rest of it follows. But one of the actions that I thought about was professionalism. So I don't know exactly how we would juggle those two, but I think I was not the one that suggested adding professionalism, but I appreciate that because I was thinking along the same lines as that comment. So, but I do think it's important that somehow through our actions with the community, when we're out there on a day-by-day basis, or respect for the office that we have and representing the folks that elected us, I do think our actions play into the respect, this very first one under norms. So I'm happy to hear other people's points of view on this, but at least that's what I was thinking in terms of the minor edit I wanted to make. Thank you.
Professionalism is the ways that we conduct or that we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And so I agree. That's certainly a good value that I would certainly appreciate. Vice Mayor, you moved forward like you're going to say something.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay. Councilmember Brentos?
Oh, I like the idea.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. I like the idea, and I think we should, in public too, wherever we are, and even when we meet with each other in public, we should respect each other and be professional around each other. And I'm pretty sure we do well so far. Okay.
Yeah. No blood's drawn
I
yet.
like the idea.
Very good. Marie, is it possible for you to screen share the norms, values, and principles document? And if I was more skilled, I would do it myself, but I'm turning to you. I know.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, Sean and I will tag team a little bit while we're screen sharing. One of the suggestions that we might make with regards to professionalism, as you can see on the screen, under demonstrate respect, add and show professionalism in the title. Then further on, following Councilmember Carling's recommendation in the first sentence, state the city council shows respect and practices professionalism through our actions and words, and everything else will follow.
Good. I like that.
Please.
I'm still in classroom. Right now, I'm really impressed with the staff, really. And I like the way you greet each other and talk to me, and the way you are patient with me when I, try to figure out what I'm doing. And I really, I am impressed, and I like meeting with you. I think you have a great bunch of professionals on the staff.
as I was going through the document and considering professionalism from my standpoint, I looked at demonstrate respect, and I thought that was the ideal place to add professionalism in. So I think we're all aligned here. And Councilmember Branning, does this work for you as well?
Yeah, no, I love the suggestion. I think it fits in very closely with respect as far as my definition of professionalism and respect would personally. So, and I support also the suggestion of putting in the words and actions.
Very good. Thank you. Marie, if we could go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Great. Okay, so let me move us forward here. Oh, okay, okay. So we're on to the next one and the next one. And now we can move to, yes, one more slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so that covers the norms and values. And so there'll be the one edit change to respect to add professionalism and actions to that item. We move on to principles of government. And just as a quick refresher, this section of the document covers governing on an at-large basis. It's the very first paragraph under principles of governance. And then the document goes on to provide a fairly detailed description of council's responsibility, staff's responsibility, and the city attorney's responsibility. And there's a little couple sentences at the very end that describes the council advisory body relations. So we can move on to the input. Oh, next slide, please. So council input, asking your feedback on the principles of governance section. And overall, there was agreement that the principles are accurate and useful descriptions of how the city should be governed and managed. And what I heard from you all was, yes, council acts as policymakers. That's in quotation marks right out of the document, very clear to the five of you. Staff supports council and implements policy. Now, there's a larger description, but that's the shorthand version of what staff's responsibility is. And the city attorney, again, quoting directly from the document, provides legal oversight of the city's governance, operation, and public policy. So very clear on the roles and responsibilities of council, staff, and city attorney. And we can go to the next slide and have a discussion on a couple other additional input items. It was also suggested that there's a need to emphasize the council's commitment to govern on an at-large basis to address the needs of the entire community. So let me open that up to council. Questions about that? Why is it important to emphasize that? What is behind that item that you feel is important for council, staff, and the community to know?
Vice Mayor?
I think just clarifying, something that I think we should try to make practice is not using jargon in public documents. They might not understand what at-large means, even though we understand what it means. So if we can add a description, I think that would be great.
Very good.
I think one of the things that, particularly the emphasizing the need to govern on an at-large basis, the city of Livermore just gone to, for the first time, have gone to completely district elections. And the mayor's at large, but we have 4 districts now. And one of the, I was struck by a comment that Edmund Burke, who was an Irish statesman, back in the day. I didn't know him personally, but he said, you choose a member indeed, but when you have chosen him, he is not a member of Bristol. He is a member of Parliament. And yes, we may be from districts, but we represent the benefit of the city as a whole. So that's how we have to think of ourselves as representing the city and not just our district. So absolutely, I think that's something we need to focus on.
Excellent. Very good. Other concerns, questions, comments?
I just have a question. It says, what you wrote down was to emphasize the need to govern. Was it really the vice mayor's point that by the emphasis?
The idea was that this is an important item And it needs to be emphasized and reiterated and making sure that there's clarity what that means for council, for
Okay.
staff, and for the community.
I thought it might just mean put it in bold or something, but it's.
Yeah. Well, I do see that it is the very first item.
Right, right.
Under principle, so it just by placement, it shows level of.
Well, I agree with the vice mayor. I think there are probably people that don't know what at large means.
Good.
So I think that's worth clarifying and
Does that mean they
defining.
haven't caught him yet?
Oh, I don't know, but
Still at large?
yeah,
Bad joke.
it
Sorry,
is.
it's what I do. Councilmember Branning.
Thank you. Yeah, so looking at kind of the statement, I think one of the things I would do to help emphasize this, aside from, I do agree on making the language a little bit more clear, but also adding in something, a statement akin to will make decisions for the good of the entire community. Because right now the wording is things like will govern the needs of the entire community, will allocate resources community-wide, wording like that. And I think just adding, some sort of statement along the lines of make decisions for the good of the whole community.
Excellent. Good. Good. Sound good for the rest of council?
So again, I think that, again, student history, Samuel Adams, not the brewer, but the soul and spirit of democracy is virtue. And it's about the respect that we have for each other, respect that we have for the community. And if you don't have that sense of virtue, then I think democracy truly is in trouble. But that's how we conduct ourselves amongst each other.
Excellent, very good. Okay, so these are additional changes and some edits that we're capturing here. As your city manager said, we'll make those corrections and bring those back to you for formal approval. We can move forward. One more, next slide, please.
Mr. Spano, would you like to go back to the advisory bodies?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. My goodness. Yes, the other item here was as I mentioned, there's just a couple sentences at the very end of the principles segment that describes the council advisory body relations. Suggestion from council in our one-on-one interviews, should you include a more detailed description of the council advisory body relations? For example, is it a one-way flow of information? Is it a collaborative relationship? Obviously, clearly, your commissions and boards are advisory, but is there a need to clarify in more detail what that relationship is? And I do note, and your city attorney knows this, there is a little section in your rules of procedure on commissions and boards, but it's very much about commission and board meetings. It's not about the relationship between council and your commissions. So is there a desire on council's part to include a more detailed description of the relationship between council and your advisory bodies?
Councilmember Branning.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is one of the things I know that we discussed.
Yes.
I'm not sure if others did. And so having come from a number of advisory bodies before being here, I think it would be helpful for us to know, is our relationship with an advisory body collaborative? Are we, as a council member, should we be going to meetings, talking with the people, giving, our feedback with them? Or is it just they advise, we get the information as a full body? Would it require a council vote to go speak with a sub or a commission? Kind of how that information flows back and forth, and how we can best utilize the commissions to make sure that they're serving our community at the maximum possibility they can.
My feeling is that my thought is that we want the commission or that advisory body to go out into the community and collect information for us. And then they provide that information back to us. If we go to them and say, well, this is the type of information that I want, there's a potential of tainting that process. It's like in genetics, Mendel, all the data that he had was exactly 1 to 2 to 1. that's because he told his monks that's what he expected. And so in that case, the data came back somewhat, it wasn't the pure data. So, and if each of us goes to an advisory body meeting and tells them what we specifically want, well, then they've got 5 different inputs. So I think that it's better if we give them the charge to bring that data and bring that information back to us, and then we absorb that, rather than us. We've already told them what we want from the council. And I think that's a better way to go than to have individual council members possibly saying what they're looking for. So I think that it is more one way, that they're bringing the data to us, and that way it's the pure data from the community. Makes sense? Vice Mayor?
This is also a potential Brown Act issue, correct, Jason?
There's opportunities for a Brown Act violation in this. There's also opportunities, as the mayor mentioned, to skew due process and have undue influence. So we've recommended that it be a one-way conversation in the past. But that's what's before you today, is to discuss whether you want to continue that process.
Okay, great. So my suggestion would be that it stays one way, but maybe we clarify what that looks like. Right now it says through their recommendations. What do those recommendations look like for the bodies right now? We get their meeting minutes, and sometimes we literally get a recommendation passed to us onto a meeting. So if we can just make that really clear, just so this is more of a single source of truth of what this relationship looks like, I think that could potentially solve some of that confusion.
I like single source of truth. I like that.
Vice Mayor Kick, and I think that's what was been utilized by staff so far with the liaisons, that if a particular advisory body has a question that they need direction from the council, they'll formally send a request to you. They'll approve either a memorandum or a letter to you seeking that direction.
And so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I think that having clarity of that in the body, I think it's probably good to go that direction. Also, just adding something that makes it clear that that's part of our policy with the advisory bodies.
Perfect. Very good. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, just an additional point, building on our city attorney's point, that currently the rules address that the advisory bodies should be going through their liaisons to reach the council. An additional suggestion that we may want to consider from staff is advisory bodies report to you at least on an annual basis on what they achieved in the last year. During that same report, we can incorporate information on their work plan for the next year. So that may be a good opportunity for you to provide input and direction to the advisory bodies during that report that, again, will include their work plan for the upcoming year.
And certainly, like with the Climate Action Group and the General Plan Advisory Committee, we will be getting reports back from them. So it's another opportunity to get data and information.
So if that's the direction of the council, which is to expand that as the city manager has suggested, we can incorporate that into the rules of procedure. Jumping a little bit ahead, but I can take that direction now and make sure I make that adjustment.
Okay.
I guess he had something. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on advisory bodies and council relations? Yes, council member Barrientos.
I like the green button here. I've sat in commissions down in Santa Clara County, and one of the things that frustrated me is that we worked hard to present something to the in down there as county supervisors, and then they kind of ignored it. And it really got people a little ticked off when they put a lot of work in and find like, why are we sitting here when they don't even care what we think? And I think we have to find out and make sure that they understand that we appreciate what you're doing, and we might not agree with it, but at least we know that they should know that we appreciate the work they did. And that's one of the things that bothered us. And it got contentious a couple of times because I don't like to sit somewhere for hours and find out it's a waste of time for me. And I think people would serve more and come, get more involved. They know that their input's important.
Excellent. And for me, the key word that you mentioned was ignore. That the elected body would ignore the advisory body. And I think that does violate the spirit
You don't need to agree with your advisory body, of course, but to ignore them, I think, would be to diminish the role of the advisory body itself. Okay, I think we can move forward. I asked a couple other questions that don't pertain, only indirectly pertain to your norms, values, and principles. And so I asked, how should council communicate with staff? So this was more open-ended, more free-flowing kind of conversation between us. And the summary points were that it's important for council to work through the city manager when communicating with staff. And so that's a very critical feature, of course, of council manager form of government, that you work, you have two employees who work for you. You have the city manager and city attorney. And of course, the city manager is responsible for hiring administrative staff. And so you work through the city manager when you're talking to department heads or lower level staff. And then to meet with staff to ask questions and get information before council meetings. That is how you all said council should be communicating with staff, taking advantage of that time before meetings to have your questions answered, to be able to engage with staff. And part of that is avoid surprising staff at meetings. Seems fairly straightforward. Any thoughts about that? Any other way of looking at it? Anything needs some clarification here?
I remember having it once said that there are several reasons that a council member will ask a question during a meeting. And it's provided greater clarity for the audience and to emphasize a point. And that the very last reason that a council member will ask a question is to actually get an answer. Because I have found that if we're trying to educate the public on something, it's best to advise staff what you're going to ask so that they can bring the answer back. And really, it makes everybody look good because you ask this very insightful question during a meeting and you get a great answer back. So it's great to have this communication between staff and the council so that I do not ask a question unless I know what the answer is, because that way the public can learn the answer and everybody looks good. But to make sure that the staff has that answer at that time, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate the public and let them know why we're making the decisions that we are. So it's very helpful if the staff has those answers beforehand.
Excellent, very good. And for me, that demonstrates the partnership that should exist between council and staff. It really is a partnership.
I've worked with some boards where they try to play gotcha with the staff, and it sets up a sense of distrust between the staff and the council. And we really need to be working together as a team, educating the public and moving these initiatives ahead. So it's best if everybody's on the same page and we all have the right answers.
In my experience, councils that periodically check in, how are we doing working with staff? Staff, how are you doing working with council in this kind of session is very helpful. So that bad habits don't start seeping in and then you start having to make course corrections and fixing things and you're out in front in more of a prevention mode to maintain a good council staff relationships. Which I will say I have seen in my time with Livermore. I've seen that demonstrated over and over again. And it's wonderful to see the current council continuing that positive practice and tradition.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to clarify because I don't want anybody to use those words against you. You do ask questions when you don't know the answer, but you do it beforehand during your homework so that you can learn the answer. To emphasize the importance that there is pre-work involved in these meetings, that we're asking those questions ahead of time so we can get through these meetings in a timely manner and be professional but it does not mean we're not asking questions we don't know the answers to.
But from the dais,
Yes, yes,
I don't ask questions from the dais unless I know the answer.
because you've done your homework.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Thank you for clarifying that.
Very,
And-
want to make that very clear.
And the vice mayor makes a great point. It also facilitates your meetings and moves your meetings along, right? So you're not here till midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning.
We're here to get the information to the public, to
Absolutely.
make the right decisions.
Absolutely. Okay, I also asked the question, what does council need from staff to be most effective? Council is looking for staff to be available to answer questions before meetings, which I know the city manager and the rest of the staff is very keen to do. Keep council updated on key issues and be proactive about keeping council updated. This was mentioned already by the vice mayor, limit or explain jargon and technical terminology in staff report and presentations. You all may know that the jargon and terminology, but the public may not. And so it's part of educating the public and making the work that you do accessible to the public. And be respectful of council's time. Let council know what staff needs to be successful. So giving permission to staff to be proactive and telling you, this is what we need to be successful in terms of information, resources, or et cetera. Any thoughts about any of those? Not that there needs to be, but just summarizing back what I think are really excellent points in terms of council staff relations. All good?
Well, one of the things that I have impressed upon staff is, and especially to that last point, it's the council's job to get the staff the tools that they need to do their job.
Yes.
It's the staff's job to tell us what those tools are. And it's communication so that we understand the limitations, and that's why things have to go through the city manager. But then the city manager lets us know what tools the staff needs to do their job.
Perfect. Very good. And then the last question, if we could go to the next slide, please. What can council do to support staff's effectiveness? Council maintains their policy-making role, avoids directing staff in the implementation of policy or daily operations. So the two distinct roles of council and staff, and maintaining those roles and having respect for each other's roles. Gives clear policy direction. I believe that is in your norms and values and principles document. Provide staff with the responsibility and authority to solve problems. So in that sense, empowering staff. Provide staff with the necessary tools, resources, and training, as the mayor just mentioned. And also, staff is respectful of council's time, and council is respectful of staff's time, as well as the resources that staff has available. Mr. Mayor, are you okay with that?
Sounds great.
Yep, excellent. Very good. Okay, I think if I'm not mistaken, that takes us through our norms, values, and principles. And I didn't think it was going to take that long, just given the agreement and consensus that I heard coming out of our one-on-one interviews. And the distinction here is your norms and values are council generated. And these really don't have a lot of power other than the power that you give them. You're legitimizing those norms and values. They're not externally imposed on you. I'm going to turn it over to City Attorney Alcala, who's going to walk through rules and procedures. And these are more firm, you might say, in terms of being rules and not norms. So we move into a slightly different area of our workshop today. City Attorney Alcala.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Jason Alcala, and I am your city attorney. What you have before you this afternoon are the city council meeting rules of procedure. These are guidelines for the orderly and consistent and fair conduct of your meetings. And they also implement state law, primarily the Brown Act. Through these rules, which have been developed over time, it balances the public's right to participate, observe, and address you on matters of city business, but it also balances with your need to complete that business. The primary benefit of these rules is that it promotes public confidence in the integrity of local government. Now, this afternoon, I'm not going to go through a comprehensive review. This is a 34-page document, so I'm not going to read you each line and go through section by section. Rather, I'm going to focus on the recommended changes developed by staff, some in response to council direction and requests, and other ones that we've identified to help you with your process and to reflect what your practices are. So with that, I'm going to change screens here. Where is it? I'm not finding it. Let me stop sharing. In a moment, if I can't get this going. All right, this is not going to work. So I do apologize for this. I should have walked through this. Let me try one more time.
It's a
See if it'll
hardworking
come.
bunch.
I am not finding the PowerPoint. I mean, the PDF document. Yeah, if we can get that. If you can share that. I had it loaded on my screen. It's just not, I apologize for that. To begin, as we're working through that, the first change we proposed is one that's passing throughout the document. What we had, if we can go to page, I think it's page 3. Yes, if Marie, if you can scroll to page 3. There we go. So the first one was at the direction of the council, when the subcommittee last revised the rules of procedure, it made a request at that meeting to change the term mayor to presiding officer throughout the rules. And that's when the mayor was actually conducting the meeting. The reason for that was these rules are also adopted by our advisory bodies and directed to follow that. And it's also for you as a city council that it may not be the mayor, it may be the vice mayor. And if both are absent, then it would fall to a council member. To be clear in the rules that it's the presiding officer who has his duties and responsibilities to conduct the meeting. So that drives most of the changes throughout this document. So you'll see that it actually changes the numbers as well. That's why we didn't do it last time. It came up late. We didn't have the time to retool it. So we do have that opportunity now. Marie, if you can scroll to page 5. In Rule 8.4.1, we're required to designate the location and time of each meeting. The one that fluctuates the time of commencing your closed session. So what we've done here is your practice has started those closed sessions earlier. So we're recommending that we change this to show that it starts between 5 and 7 for closed session. So that's what that change does. Marie, if we can move to page 14.
I have a quick question about that, Jason.
Certainly.
We have had closed session after meetings
Yes.
in the past. Does this cover that?
That's
Or
already
after?
covered. That is already covered in your rules. The challenge is you have to give the notice of your start time. And the start time fluctuates, 1, based on whether you have a closed session or not, and 2, based upon the number and complexity. We've started as early as 5 o'clock. So we want to be able to let the public know in advance that we may start as early as 5 to check the agenda of that meeting. After the meeting and conclusion, that's fine. We don't necessarily need to have that spelled out in the agenda. We do in the agenda, we do in the rules, but we don't have to specify the actual time because we don't know it. Thank you. So on to page 14. This is just a pause to recognize a change that was made by the former city council to the rules. We previously had a item on our agenda called Citizens Forum. That's when the public had the opportunity to address the city council on anything within its subject matter jurisdiction. That Citizens Forum has been changed to Public Forum. So I just want to be clear that that's what you're going to see in your agendas going forward. I'm sorry, Open Forum. I am still learning that myself, so thank you for that. So it's now no longer Citizens Forum, it's Open Forum, and that's throughout the rules. Page 15. In this rule, we talk about public hearings and where you mail notice. As this council may recall, some of the continuing council members, we had a situation last year where we mailed notice to a property owner. Unfortunately, the property owner changed hands in between. Most of the state statutes will say direct us to provide notice to the property owner, but based upon our experience, we want to be a little less restrictive and a little more open. So we'll send it to the property owner as required by law, as well as to anybody who has control of the property. Sometimes it's a tenant. So we're making that change here, taking that word out. Again, on page 15, Rule 10.6.1, this allows the presiding officer to call public hearing items concurrently. The expectation was that they would be related matters. As we're seeing here, the word related was missing. So that's a simple cleanup. Moving on to page 17. This item just closes a bookend here. You have two different areas on your agenda for matters of business besides public hearings. One is your consent calendar and the other is your matters for consideration. The distinction between the two, and it's called out very specifically for the consent, that those are items of business that are routine and don't necessarily require discussion and direction from the city council to implement. What was missing here is completing that thought for the matters for consideration, which do require that opportunity for a council to discuss and provide direction. So we're just making a cleanup here. Page 18. Thank you. This is an item that came up and it caused more consternation for advisory bodies than it did for the city council. This is with regard to the motion to adjourn. Generally, the rules of procedure and the way the council has conducted its business was at the end of the meeting, the mayor would adjourn the meeting without a formal motion. And that's what our rules reflected. What we wanted to do is just clearly articulate that's still fine. That's a practice. If we get to the end of the business, we've done our entire agenda. The mayor or the presiding officer at that time can adjourn the meeting without a formal motion. However, the opportunity to adjourn at any other point in time during the meeting will require a formal motion of the entire advisory body. Page 19. Again, this is just highlighting and doing a pause here to recognize prior changes by the city council. We previously had a portion of our agenda called citizens' rights. We have now changed the title of Rule 12 to be speakers' rights. Moving on to the bottom of page 21. And this is where we get into some substantive changes. In particular, with regard to the consent calendar, we have a consent calendar that's built for efficiency. They're typically routine items that the council takes action on in one motion. What's been unclear in the past is how many times a speaker can speak to that. Can a speaker speak to each one of those items on there? A practice has evolved over the past 24 months where the city council has expressed a desire that since they take an action in one motion, there's an interest in having the speakers have 1 3-minute opportunity to address all the contents on that consent calendar. So I'm looking for direction on this one in particular. Is that the council's desire that if you have a consent calendar, someone wants to speak to it, they have 1 opportunity during those 3 minutes to speak to each of those items on there, or do you want to allow them to speak on each item and have up to 3 minutes for each item? So discussion and direction.
I would suggest having it be one time. And most times, if there's an item on consent that does need significant discussion, we will pull it for separate discussion, in which case they would be allowed to comment separately. And I think that kind of takes care of that issue.
That's exactly right, Vice Mayor. And that's what the rules currently reflect in the revised version right here is there's 1 opportunity for the community to speak on all consent calendar items. However, if you as a city council pull an item for discussion, that will automatically allow the public to have an additional 3 minutes for that particular item. So yes, that's what the current recommended change reflects.
I think that's a good compromise.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. We will proceed with that. Moving on to page 23. And this is Rule 12.6. This is one of the more challenging rules. This is when we're dealing with disruptive activities, behavior within the council chambers. That can be very challenging for certain cities, and in particular, the city of Los Gatos had a situation where their council chambers were being taken over by people who were trying to stop the efficiency and the flow of government. In response to that, the state legislature adopted SB 1100. Now, what does that do? That recognizes what we already know in law. Prior to SB 1100, the city council could not remove somebody from the council chambers for disruption unless that person actually disrupted a council meeting. The case law that developed that was an individual coming out of the city, I think it was in Santa Cruz, where the individual was in the back of the room. He was drawing attention by engaging in a Nazi salute. I kid you not, he was in the back doing a Sieg Heil, trying to take the audience's attention away from the city council to focus on that individual. In that situation, the city council responded by having that individual removed. The court held otherwise. It says that individual was there, but he wasn't actually disrupting the meeting. Disrupting the meeting, what we'd be looking for is situations where the city council can't hear themselves talk. They can't not hear staff. There's an interference with the ability to communicate with the public and the public to communicate with the city council. So that's typical disruptive behavior we had prior to this bill. Now, what did this bill do? This bill now requires the presiding officer, if there's a disruption, to formally warn that individual that their behavior is disrupting the meeting and that they need to conform their behavior and stop the disruption. If they don't, and they proceed on that, then the city council can then use the tools it's had previously, which is to remove that individual. The one exception being if there's an actual threat of violence. If someone comes in, they're wielding a hatchet. I've had a council member in council meeting, not this council, but at a former client I represented, person had a hatchet in the chambers. You don't have to warn them. The police and the sergeant at arms can respond at that particular time. You don't have to do a warning shot in that situation. But what I would recommend is if we find ourselves in a disruptive situation, follow the rules, which recommend we use de-escalating opportunities. We'll take a break, we'll take a recess, try to work with the individual to conform their behavior. If failing that and the activities continue, then we can actually evaluate whether or not to trigger or utilize this particular rule. So this is just an opportunity. It's a long way of saying this is an opportunity to conform our rules to state law. Are there any questions on that particular item? Thank you. Seeing none. Let's see the bottom of page 23 in Rule 12.7. This has been evolving during our hybrid meetings. During hybrid, we created an opportunity for the public to provide a written public comment for a particular item of business, whether that's your open forum or that's your actual item of business. They could either show up when we transitioned. Initially during hybrid, we only could take written comments. We've continued that practice now that we're back in person and we're taking live oral comments. But the rule we have right now, we're looking for clarification. The way it's written right now is the speaker has one opportunity, either to provide a written public comment to you or to provide an oral comment. So I'm looking right now, the rules as they're drafted, and we may need to clarify them a bit further, which is that's the council's desire. One public comment, whether written or oral. So that's what I'm seeking direction on today.
Councilor Carly?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think the problem has been is that it's been a little unclear. Well, to the public, for one,
Mhm.
that they only get sort of one shot. Because there have been times when they've sent us a written comment and then they stand before us and read exactly the same thing.
Right.
And so somehow we need to communicate to the public that they get one shot, so to speak. Although sometimes I suppose somebody may write something. So I mean, they may write something that's completely different than what they want to say at the meeting. So again, I think it's clarification to the community is more than anything that. But I think one 3-minute or one written is fine.
Thank you. Well said. And that's what we're looking for direction, because we can work with the language we've proposed here and develop it further to bring that clarity. But that's what we're proposing
Councilor
here.
Branning?
Yeah, I think for ease flow of the meeting and just keeping things sane, I think a person, if they want to submit a written comment and want to speak publicly, I think it's easier for us just to allow it. Their written comment doesn't count against their comment limit. Otherwise, again, with some of the problems that Councilmember Carling brought up, someone submits a written comment, comes up, says they want to comment, and then do we have to ask them, is it a unique comment? Is it a different item? Check a name list for each person who comes up to make sure that Marie has the list of people who can't comment on this item. I think the confusion isn't worth the headache, basically. So I would allow a written comment and a public comment.
That's why we're having this conversation today, because we do want to have some clarity one way or the other, so we can, one, make sure we know what to do as far as staff, and two, so we can then inform the public as well.
Vice Mayor?
I feel like this is one of the opportunities where practice and practicality is going to have to dictate policy, because I think in theory, I would say one and done, but I just don't think it's a good use of staff time and resources to be monitoring that as we're trying to go forward. So maybe it's a strong suggestion to leave one comment, but maybe not an official rule. I'm just looking over at you, Marie, and I don't want you to be mad at us. We make that a rule for you.
Councilor Leontis? Comment?
I guess some people come here all the time, so they kind of know how it works. With some new people, they may not know how it works, and they get flustered. Yeah, a lot of people have a hard time
doing this, coming and talking. I do too, even though I'm here. I find it hard at times. But I think somehow we gotta guide them when they come through, unless they're, the gentleman that comes in here and likes you. Anyway, I know I've written comments to the city council, and I've also spoken to. And sometimes I change it a little bit because something came up that made me address the subject in a different way, in a different manner. And I'm not sure how you're gonna work that out, because when they want to be heard and they got a point to make. But I have no real answer for that right now.
Yeah, I think that trying to monitor where somebody sends in an email, and then it's up to the staff to try to figure out, okay, is this person going to show up in person? Are they going to show up? We go through all the emails anyway. We get that supplemental packet, we go through it. I haven't seen a lot of people where they will send in a written comment and then come up and speak, because usually the reason they send in a written comment is because they can't come to the meeting. We have had some circumstances where people will come in and read a written comment on behalf of somebody else, and then they will get up and try to provide a verbal comment. It's like, no, it says right in the rules of procedure, you have 3 minutes, and you can either use your 3 minutes for somebody else, or you can use it for yourself. But I think that rather than try to keep a list of who's provided written comments, I haven't seen a problem where somebody's written a lot of written comments and then come in and spoken. Usually it's one or the other. I would ask the city clerk, has that been a problem in the past?
What we do when written comments are submitted is we do let the submitter know that it is one or the other and give them an opportunity to withdraw that written comment if they'd like. It is too challenging in a live meeting to be checking names back and forth for us. So oftentimes we're unable to really enforce that, and we do have people slip through where they get both. But we do let each person know who submits a written comment that it is one comment per person. And if they'd like to submit an oral comment, that we're happy to withdraw that written comment.
Of course, in the supplemental packet, that's already gone out.
Well, when they send the written comment before the supplemental packet goes out, we let them know that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I didn't realize you let them know that. I mean, it has been, this is way more, well, I don't think it ever happened before COVID. So I think COVID sort of instigated this. And so I think I saw it. It didn't happen a lot, but it happened enough that I remember it. Yeah. But I think the suggestions that we've heard are fine. I agree. With the vice mayor, we don't need checking names. It seems to be not a good use of time. So.
I think of that. From what I'm gathering from the conversation and direction I'm hearing this afternoon is, rather than having a hard and fast rule that we have to now enforce, which is one or the other, and monitor this, the city will continue its practice, but it'll discourage people and give them the opportunity to withdraw their written comment if they want to make an oral comment. But we will not have a situation where staff would then be required to monitor or say, no, this person's already provided a written comment, and then turn their mic off. Very good. So I think we will make the adjustments to reflect that. Thank you. Marie, if we can go to the bottom of page 29 and 30. 29 and page bottom of 29. Thank you. Want to stop and highlight on this particular rule. This is with regard to abstentions and silence when the vote is called before the city council. This is an important rule to review, since it is one that's been crafted by the city council and does modify Rosenberg's. What happens here is if a city council member wants to abstain from participating in a decision on an item, first, that's discouraged. Lack of participation, particularly when you're not disqualified for a legal reason, such as a conflict of interest, it deprives the public of one vote, and it leads to sometimes unintended consequences. So the rule that's been evolved and developed over time is that if a council member does indeed want to abstain from a particular item, one, they need to make that abstention notice at the beginning of the item. So they have to tell the entire council and the public that they're not going to participate in the discussion. If they do that and they do not participate, and then when the vote is called and they say abstain, it'll be tabulated as an abstention. However, If a council member announces an abstention and then does continue, then proceed to participate in the discussion, at that point, that council member would need to cast a vote when the roll call is brought forth. If that council member then attempts to say, well, I abstain, despite their participation, these rules direct the city clerk to tabulate that abstention as a vote in favor of the motion. So I just want to be clear there. Thirdly, is if a council member doesn't make an announcement, participates in the discussion, and then at the end does attempt to abstain, again, the rules direct that abstention be tabulated as a vote in favor of the motion. Basically, if you have an opportunity, you don't agree with a particular motion or action, the rules do direct you to take a formal action to say no. So, Councilor, Vice Mayor Kick.
And that's only when it's not legally required. to
Correct.
abstain. Okay.
Correct.
So it's abstention versus recusal.
Correct.
Right, okay.
And the recusal has a different set of rules that go along with that. When a council member is required to recuse themselves due to a financial conflict of interest, say pursuant to the California Political Reform Act, that basis for the recusal needs to be identified on the record, and that council member needs to leave the chambers, and they were called back in. What you have here before you is one final change or amendment to the silence. Now, we had a situation in the silence. The rule as it's written now says if a council member doesn't cast a vote when the roll call is called, it remains completely silent, the rule says that that vote will be tabulated in favor of the motion. Well, it doesn't quite work. Now I worked with the former mayor. He says, well, what happens if there's a 2-2? Well, you're right. There is no majority at that point. So the rule as presented to you today will change that to reflect as it does for abstention. If someone is silent when the vote is called, the city clerk is directed to tabulate that vote as a vote in favor of the motion. So I want to put that before you, make sure that's consistent with your expectations for these rules.
Yep.
So seeing no opposition or objection, that is what the rule, that will go forward, make that adjustment. Last one, Marie, if we can go to page 34 and rule 19. This is the rule that reflects your expectations for Brown Act compliance, and it focuses on some very particular behavior. One, it discourages you, and this is something you've adopted as your city council, not to use electronic devices or any other device to communicate with your peers amongst yourselves on the dais or anybody within the public. The process, the administrative record needs to reflect all the information that you've taken in for your consideration to arrive at your decision. This avoids a situation where you're texting amongst each other, coming up to a collective concurrence, and the public doesn't, one, they're deprived of that opportunity to observe that, and two, it's not actually reflected in the administrative record. So that's something that's been adopted and reflected here in this particular rule. This rule then goes on to talk about your social media presence, which is following the decision San Jose versus Smith. What the court has held is if you use a personal device, your personal email to conduct city business, that's actually a public record. And so it's the substance and the content that matters, not the form or the vehicle you used. That's why staff has encouraged the city council, when you're communicating with the public on matters of city business, use your city email address. That way we have an official record of that. We can deal with our requirements to retain records for destruction purposes, and it helps us fulfill that responsibility. Social media creates its own set of issues, which is the law has evolved over the past 10 years. And it has become law in California now, which is if an elected official or an advisory body member maintains a formal, say, Facebook page, and that's how they engage the community to receive and exchange information to help them with their decision making, that is now a public record. And with that public record, it imposes certain obligations upon the city to maintain those records, collect them, and also imposes certain obligations upon you as a elected official. You can't block somebody at that point. We've seen there's some very public stories about a Facebook page and Twitter users such as our former President Trump, who was trying to cut people off and block them. The law is, if it's going to be used for public business, it's got to be open. So this rule has been developed over time for the city council members amongst yourselves to maintain an expectation that you would not maintain a separate social media presence as an official council member. If you were to explore that, you would go through city staff and work with your PO to do that on a city webpage so that information is maintained. So the question before you today is, one, hopefully that's clear, and two, do you want to revisit that? Because we have no proposed changes to this particular rule. I just wanted to highlight it and pause here for a moment.
Okay.
City Attorney, if I could just jump in.
Certainly.
Just to make a point, under your council norms, demonstrate respect. It says very clearly that council is to avoid using cell phones during public meetings. So it shows up in your norms as well as your rules of procedure.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's an important point, just to share one quick story, why this rule came to be. And I don't think this was at your time with the city of Riverside, Mariana, but at one time, the city council in the city of Riverside was using laptops, and it was observed by the public, and someone from the public made a public records request saying, I want to know what they were searching, who they're communicating with. I want to know all that information because there was a right at issue before them they were considering. The council member's response was, they were offended. Said, well, I was engaging with my constituency. I need to get that information. Great. That drives a conclusion that should be part of the administrative record. Well, what was reflected at that particular opportunity when they actually went out, and I think Greg Priamos was the city attorney at the time, when they went and did the public records request and gathered that data, that particular council member wasn't engaged in the constituency. They were shopping. I think there was eBay and Amazon, things like that. So you're under scrutiny. Then the public is entitled to receive your undivided attention. So we encourage you to do that. That's how this rule evolved over time to what it is today. With that, I'm going to seek if there are any other adjustments you as a city council would like to make in the rules or anything you'd like us to add. And if not, the next step would be we'll return to you, as Mariana said, with a future agenda item on your consent calendar with a formal resolution to adopt these rules of procedure, which will then be directed to the advisory bodies to conform their rules to yours. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you. Very good. Thank you. Mariana, would you like to conclude?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Spano, City Attorney. As I mentioned, Mr. Mayor, we will take, and as City Attorney repeated, we will take your input that we received today, and we will return to you at a future council meeting with a consent item that formalizes changes made to today's documents. Really appreciate your time today, appreciate your input, your direction to staff. Thank you very much.